There are moments in life when the mind does not simply think, it echoes. Thoughts don't flow like a gentle stream but crash and collide like restless waves against the walls of the heart. They arrive uninvited, linger without mercy, and multiply in the quiet hours when the world has gone still. You may be sitting in a calm room, with nothing moving but the breath in your chest, yet inside, 1,000 conversations unfold at once. Overthinking rarely announces itself with noise. It creeps in quietly, disguised as reflection, caution, preparation, or care. At first, it seems harmless. Just a thought about something you said, something you fear, something that might happen tomorrow. But gradually, thinking turns into revisiting, revisiting turns into analyzing, and analyzing deepens into looping. A moment of awareness becomes a maze without an exit. Perhaps you have felt it too. The way a single concern can split into smaller uncertainties. The way memory can dig up what you had already laid to rest. The way the future can pull you away from the present before it has even arrived. Maybe your mind often feels like a lantern flickering in the dark, unable to settle because every gust of thought threatens to extinguish its light. You might not show it on your face. You may smile, speak, work, and move as though nothing is wrong. But inside, your thoughts run in circles, asking questions that cannot be answered and replaying scenes that cannot be changed. There is no comfort in repetition, yet the mind continues, convinced that one more round of thinking will bring certainty, safety, or relief. And if you are honest, you might admit something quietly to yourself: the more you think, the less peace you feel. Have you ever laid in bed at night, wanting only rest, but found yourself rehearsing conversations that never took place, or scanning tomorrow's possibilities as though worry itself could prevent what you fear? Or maybe you pick apart something you already lived, something said, something unsaid, as though the past might bend if you stared at it long enough. There is a quiet exhaustion that hides behind overthinking, not the kind you feel in your muscles, but the kind that seeps into your spirit. You may wake up in the morning already tired, not because your body lacked sleep, but because your mind never found stillness. And yet, most people never speak of this fatigue. They call it stress, or personality, or simply the way things are. They try to manage it by distraction, ambition, productivity, or escape. But silence is not the same as peace, and pushing away thoughts is not the same as letting them go. If you are reading these words, perhaps something inside you is longing for rest, not the kind that comes from sleep, but the kind that rises from within, when the mind loosens its grip and the heart no longer feels under siege. Perhaps you are tired of circling the same worries, tired of carrying invisible weight, tired of negotiating with fear as though it were part of your identity. You may have wondered quietly, is it possible to think less and feel more at peace? Can the mind be trained to soften instead of spiral? Is there a way to live without being chased by thoughts? These questions are not signs of weakness. They are doorways. Long before the noise of the modern world, long before screens and schedules and constant comparisons, human beings wrestled with the same storms of the mind. The forms have changed, our surroundings, our technologies, our distractions, but the inner landscape remains strikingly the same. Worry has always been a traveler within the mind. Fear has always sought lodging in our thoughts. Regret has always revisited what could not be undone. But there were also those who learned to greet the mind with a different kind of presence. Those who discovered that peace is not an accident of circumstance, but a way of seeing. Buddhist wisdom does not silence the mind by force, nor does it promise a life without challenge. It invites us to understand our thoughts, not as enemies to battle, but as visitors we don't have to follow. It reminds us that suffering is not born from the events of life, but from the ways we cling, resist, and imagine. It teaches us that peace is not hidden in the absence of thought, but revealed when we stop being ruled by it. You do not need to become a monk. Give up your life. or retreat into the mountains to access this peace. You do not need to erase your thoughts, perfect your mind, or pretend to feel calm. What you need is gentle guidance, teachings that speak not only to the intellect, but to the quiet ache within you that already longs to return home. Over the chapters ahead, we will walk through 5 Buddhist affirmations, simple in form, but powerful in depth. They are not abstract philosophies. They are lanterns in the fog, gentle steps back to stillness, reminders that the mind can learn a different rhythm. These teachings do not demand belief. They invite experience. They do not rush you forward. They sit beside you and say, "There is another way." You may not feel ready for silence. That is all right. You may not know how to let go. That is okay. You may still think more than you wish to. That is human. But somewhere within you is a space untouched by noise, a place not destroyed by fear, not clouded by memory, not pressured by time. That inner space does not need to be created. It only needs to be uncovered. This journey is not about forcing the mind into quiet, but guiding it back to clarity. It is not about rejecting thought, but loosening identification with it. It is not about becoming someone else, but remembering who you are beneath the noise. As you read, let the words land softly. Let them breathe with you. There is no rush here, no judgment, no expectation, just a gentle invitation to step out of the storm of overthinking and rediscover the stillness that has been waiting beneath it all. In the pages to come, we will not fight the mind. We will understand it. We will not chase peace. We will make space for it to arrive. And slowly, with each insight, the noise will begin to loosen its hold. When you are ready, we will begin with the first affirmation. I am not my thoughts. There is a quiet truth that many people never discover in their entire lives, a truth so simple, yet so liberating, that it can dissolve years of silent suffering once it is finally understood. You are not your thoughts. Most of us wake up each morning and step directly into the stream of our mind as if it were the only reality. Thoughts rise and fall like ripples on a lake, but instead of watching them, we climb into them. We mistake them for truth, identity, destiny, and even morality. A single anxious idea can color the entire day. A memory from yesterday can drain the energy of the present moment. A fear of tomorrow can steal the peace that is here now. But Buddhism teaches something different, something gentler, wiser, and profoundly freeing. The mind produces thoughts, just as the sky produces clouds and the ocean produces waves. The appearance of a cloud does not change the nature of the sky. The rise of a wave does not alter the depth of the sea. And a thought, no matter how loud or persistent, does not define who you are. The habit of identification. From childhood, we are rarely taught to observe the mind. Instead, we are trained to obey it. When a negative thought appears, I'm not enough. Something bad will happen. They don't like me. I should be better by now. We do not pause to question it. We simply follow, react, and suffer. Overthinking grows from this unconscious obedience. The mind speaks, and we bow. The mind imagines, and we believe. The mind worries, and we tense up as if danger were already here. But the mind is not an enemy. It is simply untrained. Like a young child pulling on your arm for attention. Buddhist wisdom does not suggest destroying your thoughts or forcing them into silence. Instead, it invites you to see clearly. A thought is simply a mental event, not a fact, not a command, not a mirror of your worth. The space between you and the mind. Imagine this. You are sitting beside a river, watching leaves float downstream. Some are small and harmless. Others are wet, heavy, perhaps even rotten. But no matter their shape or scent, you do not jump into the water to grab them. You let them pass. You understand they are not you. They are simply passing through your awareness. Thoughts behave the same way. They arise, drift through the mind, and fade. Some stay a moment, Some linger, but not one is your identity. The problem is not the existence of thoughts. It is the habit of picking them up and holding them as truth. Overthinking is not thinking itself. It is attachment to thought. The moment you remember, I am the one who notices my thoughts, not the thoughts themselves, a gentle separation is born. That space is your freedom. Breathing as a bridge. One of the simplest ways to remember this truth is through the breath. Before the first notification, before the first worry, before the first opinion tries to drag you into the past or future, there is breath. Breathing brings you back to the witness. Breathing reminds you that awareness exists before thought. If a cloud covers the sky does not disappear. If a thought fills the mind, awareness does not disappear. It is merely obscured for a moment. Try this. When a thought arises, especially one that carries fear, guilt, anxiety, or judgment, do not resist it. Instead, breathe once, slowly, deeply, with kindness, then say silently to yourself, "This is just a thought. I am the one who sees it." Let the breath be the ground. Let the breath be the witness. Let the breath reveal the space between you and the mind. The illusion of urgency. Most stressful thoughts share one thing in common: urgency. They arrive with a feeling that something must be solved, escaped, or fixed right now. The heart tightens, the breath shortens, the stomach clenches, the body responds as if danger were present. But so often, the only danger is the story in the mind. If you pause for just a few seconds, you may notice that nothing is actually happening in this moment. There is no tiger in the room. There is no voice condemning you. There is only the mind imagining, and you, the awareness, observing. In those few seconds of recognition, the urgency dissolves. Thought loses its grip because illusion loses its mask. The practice of gentle observation. You do not need to force the mind to be quiet. You do not need to argue with every thought. You simply need to see. Buddhist monks often compare thoughts to guests visiting a house. You are not required to invite them to stay. You do not have to cook for them, sit with them, or believe what they say. You may simply notice their arrival and let them leave when they are ready. The mind says, "You aren't doing enough." Awareness replies, "Thinking." The mind says, "Everyone is judging you." Awareness replies, "Thinking." The mind says, "What if you fail?" Awareness replies, "Thinking." Not as rejection, not as mockery. Simply as recognition, calm, clear, and unafraid. The morning moment. The most powerful time to remember this truth is in the first quiet space of the day, before you become entangled in the noise of the world. Before you look at your phone, before you replay yesterday's worries or anticipate tomorrow's weight, sit for a moment, feel the breath enter, feel the breath leave, notice the mind beginning to speak. Do not chase it, do not resist it. Just watch. Then gently affirm, "I am not my thoughts. I am the space in which thoughts appear and disappear. I am the awareness that remains." This simple recognition shifts the entire tone of your morning. Instead of beginning from tension, you begin from stillness. Instead of being pulled into mental storms, you remain the sky that holds them. There is a quiet strength that rises within you when you stop identifying with every thought that knocks on the door of your awareness. Most people, without realizing it, live as though their thoughts are unquestionable truths, as though every storyline the mind spins deserves belief, reaction, and emotional investment. But Buddhism gently reveals a different truth. The mind generates thoughts the way the sky produces clouds, naturally, continually, and without malice. You were never asked to hold on to each one. Imagine for a moment that your thoughts were birds passing across an open sky. Some would glide gracefully, others would screech or dart. Some might land briefly and then fly on. If a loud or frantic bird crosses your field of vision, you do not become that bird. You simply witness it. In the same way, a stressful thought, a fearful prediction, or an old memory resurfacing does not become you simply by appearing. The moment you witness the thought instead of absorbing it, a subtle space opens, and in that space, peace can breathe. Throughout your life, you've likely experienced the mind's ability to create storms out of silence. One memory, long past and harmless, can return in the early morning hours and flood your emotions. A single worry about the future can echo so loudly that it drowns out the stillness of the present. Yet, when you observe carefully, you start to notice something extraordinary. Inside you there is the thinker. And beyond that, there is the one who notices the thinking. Buddhism points you toward that deeper awareness, the observer, the witness, the one untouched by the mind's noise. This realization is not about suppressing thoughts or forcing silence. In fact, it is the opposite. It is about allowing thoughts to arise without resistance and without surrender. When the mind whispers, "What if this goes wrong?" you do not need to fight it. You also do not need to obey it. You can simply acknowledge, a fearful thought is here, and let it drift by. When a judgment appears, "I failed yesterday. I am not enough," recognize it as a voice floating through your inner space, not a decree to carve into the walls of your heart. The more you practice noticing instead of merging, the more your inner landscape softens. You begin to see that thoughts lose their grip not when you wrestle with them, but when you stop giving them the power of identity. The mind might replay a conversation from the past, but you no longer have to step inside the scene and relive it. It might invent a dozen problems ahead, but you don't need to assign each one a place at your table. You are the space in which thoughts pass, not the thoughts themselves. Consider how many ideas have entered your mind as absolute certainty, only to dissolve with time. Think of the worries that once felt overwhelming but never came to pass. Think of the judgments you held about yourself years ago that you no longer believe. If those thoughts were truly you, how could they vanish while you remain? Their disappearance is proof. They were visitors, not your identity. Even powerful emotions, fear, anger, sadness, often start as thoughts. They don't respect me. Something bad is coming. I can't handle this. These silent sentences gather energy until they feel like truth. Yet, beneath that emotional current, there is still a quiet presence that witnesses it all. When you place awareness on that presence rather than the emotion loses its ability to control you. As Buddhist teachings remind us, pain comes from clinging. When you stop clinging to thought forms as truth, their sharp edges soften. One gentle practice you can use in the mornings is this. The moment you become aware of your first thought of the day, pause. Don't analyze it. Don't chase it. Just notice. You might mentally say, "thinking," and then return to the sensation of your breath. This simple act interrupts the automatic fusion between your identity and the mind's chatter. Over time, you begin to feel a clarity you didn't know you were missing. You start to dwell less inside the stories your mind tells and more inside a quiet sense of being. And that quiet beingness is not blank or empty. It holds wisdom, intuition, compassion, and calm. When thoughts stop being the rulers of your inner world, they become tools, passing data, whispers of possibility. You can listen when a thought is useful and let go when it is not. You no longer need to fear the arrival of negativity, because you know it cannot claim you unless you surrender your awareness to it. This is not a rejection of the mind. It is a liberation from the tyranny of unobserved thought. Beneath the constant commentary, you are whole. Beneath the noise, you are spacious. Beneath the rising and falling of mental waves, there is the still surface of awareness. That stillness is not something you must invent or earn. It is already present, waiting to be remembered. As this affirmation becomes part of your mornings, "I am not my thoughts," you may notice subtle shifts. Reactions grow slower, breaths grow deeper, space returns between stimulus and response. You become less entangled in fears about tomorrow, regrets about yesterday, and judgments about yourself. When someone else speaks harshly, you feel less pierced, because you are no longer carrying the weight of your mind's harshness too. When uncertainty arises, you meet it with more patience, because you are not busy wrestling with imagined outcomes. Little by little, you reclaim the inner freedom that was always meant to be yours. The dramas of the mind still appear, like characters on a stage, but you are no longer pulled into the script. You remain in the audience, calm, aware, anchored in presence. This is the quiet gift of remembering. A thought is just a thought, and you are something far more spacious, far more enduring, far more at peace than anything your mind can construct. There is a quiet confidence that begins to grow in you the moment you stop trying to fix every thought and instead simply allow it to appear and dissolve on its own. Most of the suffering that thoughts create does not come from their presence, but from the act of chasing, resisting, or believing them without pause. The mind is tireless in its production, but you do not need to become tired in your response. Sometimes a thought doesn't even speak in words. It arrives as a tightening in the chest, as an image, as a subtle unease. You might wake up and feel a heaviness before you even know why. The old habit is to search for reasons, to dig through the past, to imagine every future threat. But there is another way. You can simply notice the sensation and name it gently. Oh, tension is here, or worry has risen. You don't have to identify with it. You don't have to build a narrative around it. In witnessing gently, you give the emotion and its thought roots room to pass. The mind loves identity. It wants to claim ownership of every thought, my worry, my fear, my regret, my anger. But these thoughts do not belong to you any more than the wind belongs to the tree it brushes past. They arise because conditions give rise to them. A memory, a smell, a tone of voice, a moment of silence, and just as they arise, they also dissipate the moment you stop feeding them with belief and attention. In Buddhist teaching, observing the mind is not a passive act, it is an act of empowerment. To stand as the witness is not to abandon your emotions, but to hold them with clarity instead of drowning in them. When you realize, I am not my thoughts, you begin to separate yourself from the noise long enough to see what actually needs care and what simply needs space. There will still be days when the mind is louder than usual. Days when old fears insist on being heard, when inner criticism tries to regain control. But even then, you can return to this affirmation like a gentle hand on the back of your heart. I am not my thoughts. Even when the mind shouts, it cannot erase the truth of who you are. And who you are is the silent, spacious awareness that hears the shouting. You might practice this awareness while walking. Notice the rhythm of your footsteps. Notice a thought passing through. You don't need to stop walking to argue with it. You don't need to pick it up and carry it. It can float behind you like dust in the wind. You remain the one who moves through the moment with presence. Or perhaps you sit in the morning quiet before the world awakens. A thought about work appears, another about something you said yesterday, another about someone's opinion. One by one, they step forward like actors auditioning for your attention. But this time, instead of giving each one a role, you observe them like a silent audience. Some thoughts will stay only a second, others may linger, waiting for a reaction. But if you offer none, neither agreement nor resistance, they eventually step aside on their own. There is also a tenderness in this practice. You don't criticize the mind for thinking. You don't punish yourself for old patterns. You meet each arising with gentle recognition. Thinking happens in this body. Worry has visited this mind before. It may visit again, but you no longer make a home for it. You offer it tea and let it leave. As this awareness deepens, something beautiful begins to unfold. Silence becomes less frightening. Many people fill their minds with thought because silence feels unfamiliar. But once you have the courage to stand apart from your thoughts, silence becomes sanctuary rather than emptiness. It becomes a resting place where clarity can slowly return. And what returns with that silence? A deeper intelligence, not one made of logic and conclusions, but one woven from presence and understanding. When you are no longer tangled in thought, you can respond to life rather than react. You can see clearly what truly matters and what is merely noise. You begin to act not from fear or impulse, but from grounded awareness. Notice, too, how self-judgment softens when you stop identifying with your thoughts. The inner critic thrives when its words are believed, but when you hear that voice and say, "A judgmental thought has appeared," rather than, "I am failing," the power dynamic shifts. The thought shrinks back into what it always was, a pattern, not a truth. The same is true for fear. "I am afraid" becomes, "Fearful thoughts are present." The difference is subtle but profound. In the first, you are fused with the emotion. In the second, you create space, and in that space, breath returns, choice returns, compassion returns. Some days, the mind will not quiet easily. That is not failure. That is simply the weather pattern of consciousness. Clouds do not apologize for forming. They move according to conditions. The goal is not to force a cloudless sky, but to remember that the sky remains unchanged even when thick with storms. So when a thought insists, "This is who you are," you can smile gently and say, "No, you are only passing through." When another thought whispers, "This will never change," you can step back and watch it dissolve. When memory pulls you into old pain, you can place a hand on your chest and breathe into the present moment where life is actually happening. Again and again, return to the simple remembering. I am not my thoughts. Say it in the quiet. Say it in the midst of noise. Say it when the mind is kind. Say it when the mind is cruel. Over time, the statement is no longer something you repeat, but something you know. And what you know begins to shape how you live, how you speak, how you move through the world. You become calmer not because fewer thoughts appear, but because you believe fewer of them. You become kinder not because judgment never arises, but because you no longer mistake it for truth. You become freer not because the mind is silent, but because its noise no longer binds you. There is a deep liberation in that, a kind of inner exhale, a sense that you have finally stepped out of the prison you didn't know you were in. Not by escaping the mind, but by realizing you were never the walls. There is a quiet kind of freedom that begins the moment you stop trying to fight every thought that enters your mind. You don't have to overpower them. You don't have to debate with them. You don't have to prove them wrong. You simply have to let them be, and allow them to fade in their own time. When you stop identifying with every mental ripple, you regain something far more important than control. You regain space. Space to breathe. Space to choose. Space to feel without drowning. Space to witness without becoming. Some thoughts will still try to return, especially those that have long been your companions. Fear, doubt, guilt, self-criticism. They might knock gently, or they might pound on the door of your awareness the way a storm batters a window. But here is what changes with practice. They may still arrive, but you no longer invite them in to live with you. You can say, with softness and clarity, "I see you, I hear you, but you are not me." This is not rejection, it is recognition. Not suppression, not denial. Just a gentle returning to truth. Because you are the sky, not the weather. You are the ocean, not the waves. You are the space through which thoughts move, not the thoughts themselves. And the more you rest in that awareness, the more naturally your mind begins to soften. Thoughts lose their sharpness, the edges blur, the weight dissolves, what once felt like iron becomes mist. Over time, this affirmation becomes less of a statement you repeat and more of a way of seeing. You don't just think, "I am not my thoughts," you begin to live from that place. A moment comes, quietly and without ceremony, When a distressing thought appears, and instead of reacting, you simply notice it. No panic, no tug of war, no collapse, just awareness. And in that pause, however small, it loses its power. That is how peace enters, not in an explosion, but in the gentle returning of attention to what is real. To your breath. To the body resting in this moment. To the awareness that has always been here, long before the thought arrived and long after it passes. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this affirmation is that it requires no force, no perfection, no spiritual performance. You don't need to silence your mind to be free of it. You only need to stop mistaking its noise for your identity. Let that sink in. A thought can appear, and you can remain still. A memory can surface, and you do not have to relive it. A fear can whisper, and you do not have to believe it. A worry can pass through, and you do not have to prepare for it. This is not avoidance. This is maturity of awareness. This is inner steadiness. This is the quiet knowing. I am the one who is aware of thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. And when that understanding becomes embodied, even for a few moments at a time, overthinking begins to dissolve, not because you forced it to go, but because you stopped feeding it with identification. The monk does not silence the bell by wrestling it, he simply stops ringing it. So let the mind speak, but do not kneel to every word it says. Let thoughts come, let thoughts go, let them swirl, drift, quiet, or rise, but remain as the one who watches. Eventually, the storm spends itself in the presence of stillness. And you, the sky behind it all, remain untouched. When this truth becomes familiar to your inner world, the next affirmation begins to unfold naturally, like a continuation of the same breath, the same awareness, the same path of gentle liberation. I release what I cannot control. There is a quiet truth woven through every human life, though most of us resist it for years before we finally recognize its grace. Not everything is meant to be held, managed, or mended by our hands. Some things arrive only to pass through us. Some moments appear not to be controlled, but to be witnessed, and some burdens exist only to teach us the art of setting them down. When you wake in the softness of morning, before the rhythm of the day begins to pulse around you, there is a gentle opportunity waiting, an invitation to acknowledge what lies outside your reach. The mind, ever hungry for certainty, tries to gather every variable, every outcome, every opinion, and stack them neatly into a structure it can trust. But no matter how tightly we hold, the world will not mold itself to the architecture of our expectations. That is why this affirmation matters. I release what I cannot control. These words are not passive, and they are not a surrender of strength. They are a return to balance. They are a reclaiming of energy from places where it has been poured without return. They are a reminder that inner peace is not crafted through domination of circumstance, but through clarity of response. The world offers endless opportunities for attachment, to outcomes, to timing, to the behaviors of others, to identities we're afraid to lose. We grip at the threads of relationships, careers, reputations, and fears as though our worth depends on keeping every strand from slipping. And yet, life continues to unfold by its own rhythm, indifferent to our tension. When the Buddha spoke of suffering, he spoke of attachment, and when he spoke of attachment, he spoke of our craving to control the future, control people, control how things unfold. In trying to prevent disorder, we create inner conflict. In fearing change, we harden against life. But what if the freedom we seek isn't found in getting things to go our way, but in loosening our grip on what was never ours to direct? As the day begins, pause for a moment. Notice where your mind wanders first. Perhaps it goes to someone's opinion of you, to an outcome at work, to the health or choices of a loved one, to headlines you can't influence, to events already in motion. These thoughts rise like waves, each carrying a subtle whisper of pressure. Fix this, manage that, anticipate, control, but not every wave is yours to ride. Whisper to yourself gently, I release what I cannot control. Not because you do not care, but because care does not require captivity. Because peace does not require perfection. Because your energy belongs where your influence is real, in your actions, not in your anxieties. Think of a river. It does not grip the rocks on its edges. It does not order the storms that feed it or the droughts that thin it. It moves with presence, responding rather than resisting. When obstacles appear, it curves. When stillness calls, it rests. This is not weakness. It is alignment with the nature of things. And you, too, can live like water. This affirmation does not tell you to withdraw from life or abandon responsibility. It asks you to distinguish responsibility from illusion. You are responsible for the intentions you set, the tone of your voice, the way you treat others, the choices you make, the boundaries you hold, but you are not responsible for how others respond to their own paths. You are not responsible for the timing of loss or the arrival of uncertainty. You are not responsible for every fluctuation of circumstance. When you quietly accept this, something extraordinary happens. You return to your center. You stop scattering your spirit across an endless horizon of what ifs and should haves. You stop fighting storms you cannot prevent. You come back to the breath, to the body, to the moment where your true strength lives. Say it again, slowly. I release what I cannot control. Let the words land not just in the mind, but in the shoulders, the jaw, the heart. Feel the difference between clenching and allowing. Your nervous system has learned to brace, but it can also learn to soften. Maybe today that means releasing the need for someone to understand you. Maybe it means letting go of how fast your healing should be happening. Maybe it means accepting that someone you love must walk through their own fire. Maybe it simply means trusting that what is unresolved does not make you unsafe. Even the sky does not try to control the clouds that cross it. As you settle into this practice, you begin to notice how much peace is lost not through events themselves, but through mental resistance to them. The conversation that hasn't happened yet, the outcome that isn't yours to shape, the memory you keep replaying in hopes that, somehow, this time it will change. But each time you practice release, your mind regains clarity, your breath deepens, your energy returns to where it belongs. Buddhism teaches impermanence not to discourage us, but to deliver us, to remind us that life does not need to be forced into stillness to be meaningful. When you stop fighting the river, you realize it was carrying you all along. So take one more breath. Inhale the truth of where your influence ends. Exhale the tension of trying to extend it further, not as defeat, but as devotion to peace. You do not have to hold the universe in your palms. You only have to hold your presence. And with that inner steadiness, you can meet whatever comes not from fear, but from freedom. Say it once more, with quiet conviction. I release what I cannot control. There is a subtle but powerful shift that happens when you begin to live this affirmation not as a sentence, but as a state of being. You start to observe life instead of wrestling with it. You start to respond instead of react. You start to feel space where before there was only pressure. Let's explore how this unfolds in the everyday moments that quietly shape your inner world. The mind's habit of holding. The mind is a collector. It gathers worries the way trees gather leaves, by instinct, not intention. Even before your feet touch the floor in the morning, thoughts rise uninvited. What if they don't agree? What if things go wrong? What if today is like yesterday? These questions feel urgent, but most of them point toward things you cannot govern. The decisions of others, the pace of outcomes, the opinions floating in other minds, the future, which remains forever unborn. the past, which remains forever sealed. And yet, the mind clings. The practice of release is not suppression. It isn't pretending not to care. It is bringing awareness to the moment you begin to tighten, and then choosing to loosen. It is the difference between drowning in the current and resting gently on the surface. Each morning, you can ask yourself a grounding question. Is this within my influence, or simply within my thoughts? If it is outside your influence, breathe into the space below the worry. You do not need to exile the thought. You simply need to unhook from it. Letting others walk their own path. One of the most delicate forms of control is the desire to protect others from their own choices, feelings, or consequences. We do it out of love, fear, or attachment, but even love can become heavy when it tries to rewrite someone else's journey. If a friend is in pain, you can offer compassion, but you cannot force their healing. If a partner hesitates, you can show understanding, but not script their clarity. If a child struggles, you can guide gently, but you cannot live inside their lessons. There is freedom in remembering. You are responsible to others, not for them. When you release the illusion that you must fix or carry everyone around you, you rediscover the capacity to show up with clean energy, listening without absorbing, supporting without controlling, loving without attachment. The body's reaction to uncontrollable things. Pay attention to where control lives in the body. Sometimes it's in your shoulders, lifted toward your ears. Sometimes it's in the jaw, clenched without awareness. Sometimes it's in the constant scanning of the mind, anxiety disguised as preparation. Try this small ritual. Place one hand on your heart and one gently on your belly. Say internally, I can meet this moment without possessing it. Then notice, does something soften, even slightly? Release is often more physical than intellectual. The body knows how to loosen. The mind simply has to step aside. The illusion of perfect timing. Control often hides behind urgency. We convince ourselves that everything must happen now. That delay equals danger. That patience is passivity. But the world has always moved on multiple clocks, one for you, one for others, one for the invisible unfolding of life itself. You can plant seeds, but you cannot force the season. You can walk the path, but you cannot rush the sunrise. Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging to fixed timelines is a form of subtle violence against the nature of things. Peace doesn't come from acceleration, it comes from alignment. When you feel the rush, pause and remind yourself. The unfolding doesn't need my force, only my presence. Returning to what is yours. Each time you release what you cannot control, you return energy to what you can. Your breath, your choices, your presence, your integrity. What if, each morning, you made a gentle agreement with yourself? I will not chase the approval of those not ready to offer it. I will not try to predict what has not happened yet. I will not lose myself in problems that do not belong to me. I will give my energy only to what I can move with grace. This is not avoidance, it is intelligent compassion. The river and the stone. Imagine standing beside a river. You pick up a stone from the riverbank and hold it in your palm. Over time, the stone becomes heavy, not because it has grown, but because your muscles tire from holding it. The weight is not the stone itself, but the duration of the grip. Letting go does not erase the stone. It simply returns it to where it belongs. The same is true for worries, expectations, and attachments. You may return to them later with clarity if needed, but you are not meant to carry them every waking moment. Breath as a bridge. The easiest doorway to release is the breath, not because it is magical, but because it is always here. Inhale gently and acknowledge, this is what I carry. Exhale softly and whisper, this is what I release. 3 mindful breaths can shift an entire morning. 10 can shift an entire day. A practice over time can shift a lifetime. Reclaiming your inner space. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, something beautiful happens. Space returns. And in that space, you rediscover parts of yourself that were buried under tension, curiosity, intuition, clarity, humor, resilience. The mind becomes less like a battlefield and more like an open field. The heart becomes less guarded and more grounded. You begin to notice the quiet intelligence of life moving in ways you no longer need to supervise. And in that stillness, a deeper truth emerges. You were never meant to grasp the world. You were meant to meet it. There is a subtle kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical effort, but from the mind's refusal to loosen its grip. You may be sitting still, doing nothing at all, and yet your body feels tense, your breath shallow, your energy drained, not because of what is happening, but because of what your mind is trying to hold together. The human mind is a builder of imaginary scenarios. It rehearses conversations that may never happen. It prepares defenses for attacks that may never come. It worries about judgments no one is making, and outcomes no one has promised. And while it does this with the intention of protecting you, it often does the opposite. It traps you inside stories that weigh more than reality itself. Letting go is not a declaration of weakness. It is the quiet recognition of truth. You were never meant to carry the weather, the thoughts of others, the timing of life, or the inevitability of change. What belongs to you is your response, your effort, your presence, your integrity. Everything beyond that is like the wind. You may feel it, but you cannot shape it. If you listen closely to the moments when anxiety rises, you'll almost always find control hiding at the root of it. Control over how others see you. Control over what tomorrow will bring. Control over outcomes that depend on 100 invisible conditions. The more the mind tries to tighten its grip, the more peace slips through its fingers. Buddhist teaching reminds us, suffering begins when the mind insists that reality should be different than it is. Yet the river continues to flow. The seasons continue to turn. And life keeps unfolding whether we strain against it or not. Releasing what you cannot control is not a passive surrender. It is the reclamation of your strength. It is redirecting your energy from resistance into awareness. Consider the way a tree embraces the wind. It does not snap in defiance or cling to the stillness of yesterday. It bends, gracefully, instinctively, trusting that its roots are enough. The wind may shape its branches, but it does not define its being. The same is true for you. Life will arrive in many forms, but you are not required to meet every wave with force. Response does not need to be control. Strength does not need to be tension. When you silently affirm, "I release what I cannot control," you are not announcing defeat. You are stepping out of the battlefield you built inside your own mind. You are making space for clarity. You are giving permission for peace to return. Some days, letting go will look like a small breath before responding instead of reacting. Other days, it may mean choosing silence instead of over-explaining. It may mean walking away from what no longer aligns, or loosening the knot of expectations you tied to someone else's choices. It may simply mean trusting that not knowing is not the same as failing. This affirmation invites a shift from force to flow, from clinging to allowing, from fear to inner steadiness. And the more often you practice it, the more natural it becomes. Not because life changes to fit your hopes, but because your mind no longer clings to outcomes that were never yours to hold. When a situation arises that stirs your anxiety, pause instead of immediately intervening. Ask gently, "Is this mine to carry?" If the answer is yes, act with compassion and clarity. If the answer is no, soften your chest, return to your breath, and release it, not in anger, not in avoidance, but in wisdom. The more you respect that boundary, the more your inner world becomes livable again. You begin to see that peace is not a reward you receive after everything goes right. It is the condition that becomes possible when you stop fighting everything that goes differently than you planned. And in that moment of release, something beautiful happens. Your energy comes back to you. Your breath deepens. The world feels less overwhelming. Not because it changed, but because you stopped gripping it with both hands. There is a quiet kind of relief that comes the moment you stop arguing with what is. Not a loud triumph, not a dramatic release, just a soft unburdening, like loosening a knot in your chest that has been there so long you no longer noticed its weight. You do not need to announce it to anyone. You do not need to explain it. The letting go itself is the healing. Sometimes you don't realize how tightly you've been holding something until your fingers begin to uncurl. A conversation you keep replaying. A decision someone made that you wish you could rewrite. A future you're trying to predict. The past you keep editing in your mind. The moment you allow yourself to admit, I cannot change this, your breath naturally deepens. Your nervous system softens. The mind stops sprinting toward a finish line that does not exist. Buddhist wisdom often speaks of the second arrow. The first arrow is the event itself. What happened? What was said? What changed? The second arrow is your resistance. Your rethinking. Your clinging. Your internal protest. You may not have control over the first arrow, but you always have a choice with the second. Releasing that second arrow is an act of compassion, not just toward others, but toward yourself. Many people misunderstand acceptance as passivity, but true acceptance is active. It is mindful, intentional, and awake. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop suffering over things your caring cannot repair. It means pausing before you pour more energy into a moment already gone. It means trusting that allowing reality to be what it is does not diminish your agency, it clarifies it. Letting go also creates space for wiser action. When the mind is wrapped in tension, it reacts. When the mind is clear, it responds. You begin to see that not everything you release disappears from your life. Some things return naturally when you stop strangling them. Some things transform. Others fall away so something more aligned may take their place. But none of this can happen while you're gripping everything with fear. There is a small but powerful practice you can integrate each morning, or in any moment that feels heavy. Quietly place your hand over your heart and whisper, I release what is not mine to hold today. It may be someone's opinion of you, an unfinished conversation, a silence you can't interpret, or an outcome you are tempted to force. With each breath, imagine unclenching your hand from it, not throwing it away, simply loosening your hold. Remind yourself, if something is meant to stay, it will not need your suffering to remain. Life becomes gentler not when it removes all uncertainty, but when you stop fighting every current that doesn't move the way you want. The river doesn't stop flowing because you tense your body. The wind doesn't pause because you disapprove of its direction. People don't always understand in the timing you hope. Even your own heart moves in cycles, open one day, tender the next, uncertain the day after. Control cannot sculpt these rhythms into perfection. Patience, awareness, and release are the only tools that harmonize with them. And here is a quiet truth. What you release does not take peace away from you, it returns it to you. What you put down was never holding you together. You were holding it together. And now your hands are free. As you grow more familiar with this affirmation, something begins to shift beneath the surface. You lose interest in controlling how others feel about you, how life unfolds, or how quickly something changes. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started trusting. And trust is softer than control, but infinitely stronger. The day will still bring noise, uncertainty, and maybe even a few sharp edges. But now there is a spaciousness between you and everything else. You meet life not with clenched fists, but with an open palm. You walk not with the tightness of someone dragging invisible weight, but with the grounded presence of someone who has learned to return burdens to where they belong. This is where your inner landscape begins to change, not with force, but with allowing, not with domination, but with deep understanding. And when the mind whispers again, hold on, just in case, you will know how to respond. I release what I cannot control. Not as a resignation, not as a moment of defeat, but as an act of inner sovereignty. From that posture of clarity and softness, you naturally begin to step into the next truth. Not everything needs to be solved. Some things simply need to be seen, felt, and let go. There is an unseen tension that comes from trying to organize life into certainty. You check, you plan, you predict, you brace, you watch every detail as though your vigilance alone could prevent the unexpected. And yet, life keeps reminding you, control is not the price of safety, and surrender is not the absence of wisdom. There is a kind of courage that looks nothing like force. It does not raise its voice. It does not command. It simply stands in stillness and says, I can meet what comes, even if I cannot shape it. When you begin to trust that version of strength, something inside exhales. You realize you don't need every outcome to bend in your favor to feel grounded. You don't need every person to agree with you to feel secure. You don't need every uncertainty resolved to sleep in peace. The more you practice releasing the uncontrollable, the more you begin to sense what is truly yours to hold. Your effort finds direction instead of exhaustion. Your compassion is no longer tangled with fear. Your decisions are rooted in presence, not panic. You stop performing imaginary battles in your mind. You learn to meet reality without rehearsing its every version. Letting go does not mean stepping away from responsibility. It means knowing the boundary between what is yours to carry and what belongs to life. You can care deeply about something without gripping it. You can plan without clinging. You can hope without demanding. You can love without imprisoning. And maybe this is the quiet shift no one tells you about. When you stop clutching outcomes, you regain access to the peace that was beneath your panic all along. You begin to sense the difference between effort and strain, between intention and control, between presence and pressure. Some days, letting go is a whisper. Other days, it is a trembling decision in the dark. Sometimes it is a series of small permissions. To not check again. To not argue with the past in your mind. To not interpret every silence as danger. To not script tomorrow before it comes. And gradually, as this affirmation takes deeper root, I release what I cannot control. Something beautiful begins to happen. The unknown becomes less of an enemy and more of a teacher. You begin to sense that unpredictability does not always bring loss. Sometimes it brings alignment you never could have orchestrated on your own. There is a gentleness waiting in the space where control ends. It does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives like dawn breaking on a quiet morning, slowly, softly, without needing permission. And you realize, maybe life was never asking you to tighten your grip. Maybe it was asking you to open your hands. As this truth settles in your body, you are quietly prepared for the next step on this journey. A step rooted not in fear, but in clarity. Because once you learn to release what you cannot control, you become ready for the next inner liberation. I am not my thoughts. I am the awareness that observes them. There is a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when you begin to notice the difference between what you are thinking and the one who is noticing those thoughts. It often happens in stillness, while washing dishes, sitting in traffic, lying awake in the dark. A sentence drifts through your mind, and instead of being swept into its current, something in you pauses. There is a thought, and then, there is me, seeing it. That space, thin as breath, soft as silence, is the doorway to freedom. Most people spend their entire lives inside their thoughts, never realizing they are not the voice speaking in their head. They believe every fear that rises, every judgment that comes, every memory that resurfaces. They argue with themselves, criticize themselves, negotiate with themselves, all without ever questioning Who is the one listening to all of this? Buddhist teachings call this recognition the watcher, the witnessing mind, or pure awareness. It is the part of you that does not panic when panic arises. It does not drown in sorrow when sadness appears. It does not become anger when anger flares. It simply knows these experiences are passing through, like clouds across an open sky. The sky does not chase them or cling to them. It allows them and remains itself. When you say, "I am not my thoughts," you are not rejecting thinking. You are remembering that thoughts are movements within consciousness, not the core of your identity. They come and go, contradict each other, shift with mood, memory, culture, and conditioning. Some appear helpful. Others are echoes of old pain or habit. But none of them define the truth of who you are. There is a gentle, steady power in this recognition. Instead of wrestling with every mental story, you begin to watch them rise and fall like waves. You no longer need to suppress what appears in the mind, nor do you need to chase it. The awareness behind thought does not need to fix, analyze, or control. It simply sees, and in being seen, thoughts lose their grip. Imagine a leaf floating on a river. If you identify with the leaf, every twist in the current feels like your destiny. Every rock appears as a threat. But if you identify with the river itself, vast, fluid, ever-moving, then the leaf is simply something passing through your surface. In the same way, thoughts are not dangers to defend against or truths to obey. They are movements in the mind, not definitions of the self. It is often surprising, even humbling, to realize how many of your thoughts are recycled. They repeat themselves with slightly different masks, old fears wearing new costumes. Stories you believed a decade ago resurface when triggered by a moment of stress. Criticisms someone spoke to you long ago take shape again in your inner voice. But when awareness is present, you no longer confuse repetition with reality. There is a simple exercise in mindfulness. When a thought appears, instead of finishing the sentence, label it gently, thinking, remembering, worrying, planning, then return to the breath. You do not banish the thought, you disidentify from it. You become the witness of the mind's activity rather than its captive. Over time, this small shift rewires the way you experience everything. Even difficult emotions lose some of their intensity when you observe the thoughts surrounding them rather than fusing with them. Anxiety without the thought, "I can't handle this," is just energy in the body. Sadness without the thought, "I am broken," is simply a tender wave passing through the heart. Anger without the thought, "This should not be happening," is just heat rising and dissolving. The suffering is not in the sensation itself, it is in the storyline wrapped around it. Awareness does not argue with thoughts. It does not need to. The moment you witness a thought, you create space around it, and space is where transformation becomes possible. You can choose not to react. You can choose not to believe. You can choose to gently place the thought down like a stone you no longer wish to carry. At first, the mind may protest, "But if I don't believe my thoughts, who am I?" This question itself is another thought arising. The deeper answer is not found in language. It is felt in stillness, in presence, in the quiet aliveness that remains when thinking pauses. That wordless presence is closer to who you are than any story the mind produces. You are not the storm, you are the sky. You are not the voice, you are the hearing. You are not the thought, you are the awareness in which it appears and disappears. And as this realization deepens, not as an idea, but as a lived experience, something in you softens, something in you opens, and something in you returns home. But the more you return to that inner witnessing space, the quiet awareness that watches thoughts arise and dissolve, the more you begin to sense a deeper truth. Your mind is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a landscape to be understood. Sometimes it is stormy, sometimes it is still, sometimes it whispers, sometimes it shouts, but in all its movements, you remain the one who observes. Picture yourself sitting beside a river at dawn. The water flows past, sometimes smooth, sometimes swirling with debris, but you are seated on the bank, untouched. The river does not ask you to control it. It does not demand you to jump in and change its direction. It only invites you to witness. In the same way, every morning becomes a chance to sit at the edge of your inner river and remember, I will treat myself with kindness, not judgment. Notice how this simple shift alters the tone of your entire day. Self-talk moves from, what is wrong with me, to, what am I feeling, and what do I need in this moment? Instead of tightening around your thoughts like a fist around a stone, you soften. And when softness replaces inner tension, you gain the space to respond rather than react. In Buddhism, this is not weakness, it is courage. It is the bravery of someone who refuses to add more suffering to what already hurts. When a painful memory surfaces, judgment throws stones at it. Kindness sits down beside it and listens. When doubt creeps in, judgment pushes it away. Kindness asks, what fear are you trying to protect me from? When shame tries to wrap itself around your heart, judgment sharpens the blade. Kindness gently loosens the knot. And here is the paradox. The more compassion you offer to yourself, the more resilient you become. Softness does not make you fragile, it makes you flexible. A rigid tree snaps in the wind. A bamboo bends and rises again. Each morning, as you affirm, I will treat myself with kindness, not judgment, you are choosing to bend rather than break. There will be mornings when your mind tries to return to its old habits, rehashing mistakes, magnifying flaws, comparing your life to others, replaying conversations that ended long ago. On those mornings, do not fight the voice of judgment. Fighting only feeds it. Instead, pause, feel your breath, place your palm against your heart, a gesture so simple yet so disarming, and whisper inwardly, even this I meet with gentleness. You do not erase judgment by force, you outgrow it through compassion. Over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The inner voice that once criticized now inquires. Where it once attacked, it now acknowledges. And sometimes, in moments of quiet grace, it even encourages you. It says, you're learning. It says, you're healing. It says, take your time. It says, you are doing better than you think. This is not indulgence, it is alignment with reality. Because the truth is, nothing blossoms under the weight of hostility. Growth requires space, patience, and warmth, the very qualities your affirmation evokes. Even when you forget to practice it in the morning, it will find you during the day, like a hand reaching back for yours when you stumble. And if you let it, this kindness will expand beyond you. When someone else speaks harshly, you will recognize the echo. You have heard that tone before in your own mind. Rather than reacting with defensiveness, you will respond with understanding. Not because you are trying to be noble, but because you know what unkindness does to the heart, and you refuse to amplify it. Self-compassion, practiced daily, ripens into empathy for the world. So each morning, as sunlight begins to touch the edges of your awareness, let your first inward gesture be tenderness. Not perfection, not performance, not pressure, just tenderness, a quiet promise. I will not abandon myself today. I will not make my thoughts my enemy. I will not turn my imperfections into weapons. I will meet what comes with a gentle mind and an open heart. And if you forget, you can begin again, in the afternoon, in the evening, in the middle of a sigh. Kindness does not keep score. It simply waits for you to return. As the day unfolds, you will encounter moments, small or overwhelming, that test your intention. You might spill your coffee, forget an important task, say something you wish you hadn't, or feel a wave of anxiety rise without warning. In the past, your first reaction might have been self-blame. How could I mess this up again? Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? But now, with your affirmation rooted in the morning, a new response quietly steps forward. You pause, you breathe, and you say inwardly, I will treat myself with kindness, not judgment. You let the moment be human-sized instead of disaster-sized. You remember that a mistake is not a verdict, an emotion is not a flaw, and a setback is not a sentence. You give yourself room to feel without attacking yourself for feeling. Buddhist teachings remind us that suffering often comes not from the event itself, but from the story we attach to it. Kindness interrupts that story. It does not deny consequences or dismiss responsibility. It simply removes cruelty from the process of growth. It allows you to acknowledge truth without tearing yourself apart in the process. Think of how you would comfort a child who stumbled while learning to walk. You would not say, "You're hopeless." You would say, "Stand again. You're learning." Offering yourself that same response is not ego, it is wisdom. With practice, your nervous system begins to adapt. Your body relaxes faster after stress. Your breath softens instead of tightening. Your inner dialogue becomes quieter, less dramatic. Self-kindness rewires the pathways that judgment carved long ago. What once felt natural, beating yourself up, now starts to feel unfamiliar. What once felt indulgent, self-compassion, now begins to feel like home. And this inner shift doesn't stay inside. It radiates out in subtle but powerful ways. You become a safer place for others, not because you try to be perfect, but because you are no longer at war with yourself. You listen more patiently. You forgive more easily. You speak more gently. Your presence becomes softer, not weak, but warm, and people respond to that warmth in ways that surprise you. But all of this begins with the moment you first wake up, the space where you plant the tone of your inner voice. When you say, "I will treat myself with kindness, not judgment," you are not reciting a slogan. You are setting the emotional climate of your day. Some days will be cloudy. Some days will storm. But the climate you choose will determine how you move through it. There will also be days when judgment returns with full force, old patterns grasping at old ground. On those days, do not judge yourself for judging yourself. This is important. Offer compassion even to the part of you that still clings to harshness. That part is not evil, it is scared. It learned to protect you through criticism because it did not know another way. So when it speaks, you can quietly answer, "You don't have to fight for me anymore. I am safe with gentleness now." And little by little, the old voice will soften, not because you silenced it, but because you understood it. As nighttime arrives, you may reflect and think, "I still slipped into self-criticism today." But even then, notice what has changed. The very fact that you notice is awareness. The desire to return to kindness is growth, and the willingness to try again tomorrow is strength. In Buddhism, transformation is not measured by how few times you fall, but by how gently you rise. Each morning, this affirmation invites you to rise, not with perfection, but with tenderness. I will treat myself with kindness, not judgment. Say it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Over time, it will no longer feel like something you're trying to believe. It will begin to feel like something you always knew. There will be mornings when you wake with a heaviness you can't explain. The mind may start speaking before you're fully conscious, reminding you of unfinished work, past choices, or imagined expectations from others. In the past, you might have believed that voice without question. Now, you are learning to meet it differently. Before any thought takes root, you return to your affirmation. I will treat myself with kindness, not judgment. This is not about denying what needs attention. It's about refusing to add unnecessary pain to the pain that already exists. There is a profound difference between awareness and attack. When something in you hurts, your role is not to punish the wound, it is to tend to it. Self-kindness in Buddhism is an act of mindfulness paired with compassion. It begins with seeing clearly and continues with responding gently. If sadness arises, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you might say, "This feeling is part of being human." If fear comes, Instead of labeling yourself weak, you can breathe and say, "This is a moment of discomfort, not a verdict." If regret surfaces, you can place a hand over your heart and think, "I am still learning," and that is enough. Kindness does not erase accountability, it makes accountability sustainable. You can own your choices without drowning in shame. You can acknowledge your limits without condemning your worth. You can admit that something needs to change without tearing down the one who must change it. Over time, this inner posture reshapes how you move through the world. The more kindly you treat yourself, the more resilient you become. You stop collapsing under criticism, both internal and external. You are no longer as reactive to others' opinions because your sense of worth no longer hangs by a thread. You stop apologizing for your existence and start participating in your life with steadier footsteps. One of the most overlooked truths is this: the tone of your inner voice sets the tone of your entire day. A harsh voice creates tension before anything even happens. A kind voice allows room for growth, joy, and presence. When you speak gently to yourself, you aren't being naive. You are creating the conditions for clarity. Imagine beginning your morning not with a list of what you haven't achieved, but with a quiet acknowledgement. I am still here, I am still trying, and I am worthy of patience along the way. Imagine walking into your day not with internal hostility, but with a soft strength that says, I can make progress without punishing myself. This affirmation is not just for the easy days. It is for the mornings when you wake feeling behind, for the nights when you go to bed thinking you could have done more, for the quiet hours when your mind whispers old criticisms in a familiar tone. On those days especially, kindness is not optional, it is medicine. And remember this: even the intention to be kinder is already a step on the path. You don't need to get it perfect, you only need to practice. The voice of judgment has been rehearsed for years. Kindness, too, deserves rehearsal. You are not trying to replace the inner critic by force. You are gently inviting a wiser companion to speak more often. Over time, that companion will stand closer to the front. As this affirmation settles deeper into your life, you may begin to notice a quiet realization rising like dawn. When I stop being at war with myself, I stop being at war with the world. And from that realization, the path opens naturally to the next truth, one that shifts your relationship with desire, comparison, and creativity. Everything I need is already within me. There is a quiet kind of strength that does not come from achievement, praise, or certainty. It comes from remembering who you already are. So many mornings begin with an unseen hunger, an invisible reaching. Before your feet touch the floor, the mind may whisper, I need to become more. I need to prove myself. I need something out there to complete me. And without questioning it, you start chasing satisfaction in the external world, approval from others, future success, the next accomplishment, the perfect moment, the ideal version of yourself. But Buddhism teaches something radically different, something both liberating and disarming in its simplicity. Nothing outside you can complete what is already whole within you. So when you wake, before the world rushes in, anchor yourself with this truth: everything I need is already within me. Say it slowly, not as a slogan, not as a wish, but as a remembrance. You were not born lacking. No child arrives in this world feeling unworthy, incomplete, or behind. Those ideas are learned, layer by layer, from comparison, expectation, fear, and craving. Somewhere along the way, you started believing you were missing something essential. The world will reinforce that illusion endlessly if you let it. This affirmation is not about rejecting growth or refusing support. It is about returning to a grounded center. It is about trusting that clarity, compassion, creativity, resilience, and wisdom are not gifts you must search for in others. They are seeds already planted within you. Your role is not to hunt for them externally, but to uncover, water, and awaken them. Imagine for a moment a mountain. Wind may strike it, snow may cover it, rain may fall upon it, but none of these elements change what it is. The mountain does not panic when clouds hide its peak, it simply remains. In the same way, your essence is undiminished by temporary emotions, setbacks, or uncertainty. You do not become less capable simply because fear rises. You do not become less worthy simply because someone fails to see your value. When you say, "Everything I need is already within me," you are not denying the challenges of life. You are reminding yourself that you have the inner resources to meet them. You've survived every difficulty before this moment, not because someone else handed you strength, but because something inside you rose to meet the circumstance. You may not have always recognized it as strength. Sometimes it looked like quiet endurance. Sometimes like tears. Sometimes like patience. Sometimes like starting again. But it was yours. It came from within. This inner reservoir does not disappear simply because doubt arrives. To live this affirmation is to stop waiting for the world to hand you permission. It is to stop believing that someone else's approval must precede your peace. It is to stop thinking that joy can only come once everything is perfectly arranged. Buddhism often speaks of the original mind, a state of clarity obscured, not destroyed. Think of a pond. When the water is stirred, the mud rises and clouds the surface. But the water has not lost its stillness, it is simply hidden. With time, silence, and patience, the mud settles on its own, and the clarity is revealed again. You never had to import purity into the water, it was always there. The same is true of your inner life. When fear clouds your mind, it does not erase your courage. When uncertainty stirs confusion, it does not remove your wisdom. When comparison muddies your heart, it does not destroy your worth. The truth remains quietly intact beneath the noise. Saying everything I need is already within me is not an escape from responsibility. It is a return to empowerment. It means you are no longer living from a place of lack. You are no longer searching for pieces of yourself in other people, other achievements, or future fantasies. Instead, you act from a foundation of intrinsic fullness. From that place, asking for guidance is not weakness, it is clarity. Accepting help is not dependency, it is wisdom. Growth is no longer frantic striving, it is natural unfolding. And perhaps most powerfully, this affirmation interrupts the myth of not enough, not successful enough, not spiritual enough, not lovable enough, not ready enough. Each time the mind whispers those old fears, you can gently return to your breath and say, I do not need to chase worth. I already carry it. When this realization enters your mornings, your choices begin to shift. You no longer rush into the day trying to prove something. You move with presence instead of panic. You speak with groundedness instead of grasping. You listen to your intuition because you trust it is connected to something deeper than anxiety. Some days this affirmation will feel natural, a warm truth that the heart immediately recognizes. Other days, it may feel distant, abstract, or unconvincing. That is okay. On those mornings, do not force yourself to believe it. Instead, practice remembering it. Close your eyes, place a hand over your heart. Feel the pulse beneath your palm, not as proof, but as a reminder. Life itself is flowing through me. If I were empty, I would not be breathing. On the days when self-doubt is loud, speak the words gently, as though you are talking to a child who has forgotten their strength. Everything I need is already within me, and what is within me can be cultivated, guided, and expressed. And slowly, the illusion of inner poverty begins to dissolve. When you stop searching outside yourself for completion, something beautiful happens. You begin to live from your center instead of your fear. You stop measuring yourself by the pace of others. You stop chasing validation like oxygen. You stop believing that peace is waiting somewhere in the distance. You begin to act not to become worthy, but because you already are. This shift is subtle but transformative. When your actions no longer come from a place of lack, they become more aligned with truth. You write not to prove intelligence, but to express clarity. You speak not to impress, but to connect. You work not to secure identity, but to contribute with presence. You rest not out of guilt or exhaustion, but out of respect for your own being. Living from inner sufficiency also quiets the desperation of comparison. Instead of looking at someone else's gifts and thinking they have something I don't, you begin to see them as reminders of what exists in you too, perhaps in a different form, awaiting expression rather than acquisition. In Buddhist teachings, this recognition is like uncovering a treasure buried beneath your own home after years of searching other lands. You realize you were not poor, you were only unaware. But awareness is a practice, not a switch. One way to nurture it is through small morning reflections. Before you step into your day, sit for a moment and recall a time you survived something you thought you couldn't. Or a time you solved something without knowing how at first. Or a moment when compassion rose in you unplanned, and you comforted someone, or yourself, without instruction. These memories are not accidents. They are traces of your inner resources at work. Another practice is to observe your breath. Each inhale enters without effort. Each exhale leaves without resistance. You don't command the process, it simply happens. In the same way, strength, wisdom, and insight exist in you without force. Your task is not to create them from scratch, it is to access them with awareness and patience. There may still be moments when you feel small, uncertain, or unprepared. On those days, this affirmation is not a claim of perfection, it is a declaration of trust. Trust that you can learn. Trust that you can adapt. Trust that you can return to your center even after wandering far from it. It also means recognizing the difference between lacking something and simply not yet discovering it. A seed does not look like a tree, but everything required for the tree already lives within it. In the same way, your possibilities live inside you even before you see their branches. When fear says, "I don't know what to do," gently answer, "Maybe not yet, but the clarity will rise from within me when I meet the moment with openness." When doubt whispers, "I'm not enough," breathe and respond, "What I am is still unfolding. My value does not depend on completion." When insecurity asks, "What if I fail?" quietly reflect, "Then I will respond with the strength that has always carried me, but I will not assume emptiness before the moment comes." Remember, the purpose of this affirmation is not arrogance. It is not a declaration that you need nothing and no one. Connection is part of the human journey. Guidance is part of wisdom. Learning from others is part of growth. But you meet all of these not from desperation, but from groundedness. When you remember that you are not starting from emptiness, you stop clinging. You stop begging the world to give you what you think you lack. Instead, you engage with life as an equal participant, not a desperate seeker. And something else shifts, too. You begin to feel safe within your own presence. Not because every problem is solved. Not because you've reached some perfect state. But because you no longer believe that peace exists outside your reach. This affirmation is also a quiet revolt against the modern world's illusion that more success, more praise, more possessions, more certainty, is the cure for inner restlessness. Buddhism offers a softer, deeper truth. It is not the accumulation of what is external, but the awakening of what is internal that brings peace. You are not empty space waiting to be filled. You are a field of potential waiting to be uncovered. With each repetition, "Everything I need is already within me," you clear one more layer of dust from the lantern of your being. And as the dust falls away, the light is not created, it is revealed. Eventually, there comes a morning when the affirmation is no longer something you have to say with effort. You feel it quietly in your bones. You sense it in your breath. You trust it not because someone taught you, but because you have witnessed your own resilience too many times to deny it. And from that inner stability rises the natural desire to share with the world, not from scarcity, but from abundance, which leads to the final morning intention, a culmination of quiet strength and awakened compassion. Let me be the cause of peace today. There is a quiet strength in choosing peace, not as an escape from life, but as a way of meeting it. The world does not always offer calm spaces. Minds collide, egos defend, fears speak loudly through anger and impatience. Yet even in the midst of noise, there is a place within you that remains untouched, like a still pond beneath a stormed surface. This affirmation is not about forcing serenity or pretending everything is gentle. It is about choosing not to add to the harm that already exists. It is about becoming a presence that softens rather than sharpens, that steadies rather than scatters. When you whisper to yourself, "Let me be the cause of peace today," you are not asking the world to behave. You are inviting yourself to respond differently. You are choosing intention over impulse, clarity over reaction, compassion over instinctive defense. Peace does not begin in speeches or movements. It begins in the space between one thought and the next, where you decide whether to tense or to release, to judge or to understand, to rush or to breathe. Some mornings, being the cause of peace may mean speaking gently when irritation rises. Other mornings, it means saying nothing at all, allowing silence to do what words would only disturb. Sometimes it means apologizing before blame hardens. Sometimes it means not taking offense where none was intended. And on certain days, it may simply mean not turning your private discomfort into someone else's burden. In Buddhism, peace is not passive, it is participatory. It is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of wisdom. It is not achieved by withdrawing from the world, but by walking through it with a softer footprint. You may not control how others move, speak, or think, but you can choose how your presence enters a room, how your words land, how your energy settles or stirs the space around you. To be the cause of peace does not mean you must always feel peaceful. It means that even when your inner world trembles, you hold yourself with enough awareness not to let that tremor become harm. It might start with the smallest gestures. A pause before responding. A breath before reacting. A moment of listening before assuming. A gentle gaze instead of a sharp one. The world is built not only by the loud and the forceful, but by those who move quietly with intention. The ones who choose not to retaliate when provoked. The ones who respond with clarity instead of chaos. The ones who plant calm where anger could have taken root. To live this affirmation is not to suppress your emotions. It is to meet them with enough space that they do not control your hands, your voice, or your eyes. You do not need to solve the world's conflicts to be a cause of peace. You only need to tend to the moment in front of you, the breath within you, the person beside you. Peace expands outward from there, not as an announcement, but as a presence. And when life presses hard against you, as it sometimes will, remember, choosing peace does not make you weaker. It means you have become spacious enough inside to absorb impact without transmitting it further. It is one of the highest forms of strength, soft, unseen, and deeply felt. To be the cause of peace today does not require perfection. You are not asked to be endlessly composed, untouched by irritation, or immune to discomfort. Rather, you are invited to return, again and again, to the intention of not amplifying suffering. Some days, the most peaceful act you can offer is restraint. Not every thought needs to become a sentence. Not every trigger deserves a response. Not every discomfort must be projected outward. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not avoidance, it is protection, both for yourself and others. Other days, being the cause of peace means stepping forward instead of retreating. It may mean speaking a kind truth, acknowledging someone's pain, or setting a boundary without anger. Peace does not always mean softness in appearance, it means clarity in intention. A boundary placed without hostility is still an act of peace, because it prevents confusion, resentment, or further harm. There is also the peace you extend to yourself, not as indulgence, but as necessity. The peace that comes when you stop rehearsing old wounds, when you forgive your own missteps without dramatizing them, when you stop tightening around every mistake, every memory, every imagined judgment. Internal peace is not about dismissing what hurts. It is about not letting it shape the tone of your being. When you carry yourself with gentleness, even your private suffering becomes less sharp. You become less likely to wound others through what you have not yet healed. Sometimes, being the cause of peace looks like this: not correcting someone when there is no need, letting a small annoyance pass without naming it, offering a smile without explanation, choosing patience when impatience would be easier, allowing quiet moments to remain quiet. Even your presence, when grounded, can calm those around you, without effort, without display. Just as tension is contagious, so is equanimity. Do not underestimate the subtle power of one composed breath, one unspoken judgment, one softened reaction. These are the invisible threads that hold the world together. Humanity is not sustained by grand gestures. It is stabilized by quiet restraint and unseen kindness. And if there are moments when you fail, when irritation leaks through, when words come out harsher than intended, when peace slips from your grasp, return without shame. The path is not broken by a single step in the wrong direction. Begin again, gently. The intention itself is part of the practice. You are not asked to fix the world, only to touch it without adding harm, only to let your presence become a pause instead of a spark, a softening instead of a strike. Let this affirmation live in you not as pressure, but as possibility. Let me be the cause of peace today. In my breath, in my words, in my pauses, in the space I create for others, and the space I offer within myself. There is a quiet revolutionary quality in choosing peace, not because the world is calm, but precisely because it isn't. To be the cause of peace is not to ignore reality, it is to meet it without contributing further distortion. Peace is not passive, it is an act of creation. It is the decision to interrupt the ripple of conflict, to be a point where agitation dissolves rather than expands. You are not responsible for the storms in other minds, but you are responsible for the weather you generate within your own. To carry this affirmation into your day, you do not need rituals or elaborate declarations. You need only small awakenings, moments when you remember, before action takes over, moments when you feel the rise of frustration and notice it, like a wave forming before it crashes. That noticing is your power. It gives you the option not to pass the wave forward. And on days when your own mind feels unsettled, let peace take the simplest form possible. A breath that is not hurried, a silence that is not sharp, a look that communicates, I will not add weight to this moment. Think of the people you've encountered in life who seemed to calm a space simply by being in it. They were not people without pain, nor individuals who always felt light. They were people who learned not to place their pain in the hands of others. They held it softly, with patience, until it no longer needed to speak through them. You, too, can become that kind of presence, not through force, but through remembrance, not through control, but through surrender. Carry this affirmation gently. Let me be the cause of peace today. Not by changing the world, but by how I walk through it. Let it guide your responses, your silences, your posture, and your gaze. Let it soften your voice before sound emerges. Let it greet each person before your words do. Let it surround you in unseen ways, so that even when you are silent, something within you speaks of stillness. And remember, to be the cause of peace is not a task, it is a way of being. There is no perfection required, only presence. When the day ends and the light begins to soften, there is a quiet invitation waiting for you. A gentle return to the place you first awakened in the morning, your own presence. These 5 affirmations were never meant to be mere sentences you repeat. They are living pathways, doorways back to your inner home. I am here. I am alive. This moment is enough. Nothing outside me can disturb my peace unless I allow it. I will treat myself with kindness, not judgment. Everything I need is already within me. Let me be the cause of peace today. Across the hours, through noise, conversation, surprises, and silence, you may forget them. That is human. Forgetting is not failure. It is simply drifting. Remembering is returning, and every return strengthens your inner ground. Some days you will wake clear and steady. Other days you will wake weary or restless. Both are part of the path. The goal is not perfection, it is awareness. It is the simple decision to begin again, exactly where you are, without waiting for ideal conditions. Peace doesn't arrive because life becomes easy. It arrives because you meet life gently. Kindness doesn't unfold because you never stumble. It unfolds because you stop attacking yourself when you do. Strength doesn't grow because the world gives you certainty. It grows because you learn to trust the quiet wisdom already inside you. And the impact you leave behind, seen or unseen, does not come from loud declarations, flawless plans, or constant productivity. It comes from the small, steady radiance of a grounded heart. So as you close the evening, pause, just for a breath. Feel the softness of this moment. Notice that you have made it through another day, not by force, but by motion, breath, awareness, and sincerity. That is enough. And when tomorrow arrives, you will begin again, not as a new person, but as the same being, meeting life with a little more presence, a little more compassion, a little more peace. Because the journey was never outward. It was always a quiet returning to the calm that has loved you from within, all along. Before you leave this moment and return to the rhythm of your day, pause, just for a breath. If even one sentence, one image, or one quiet realization touched something within you, let it live a little longer. Don't let it dissolve the moment you scroll away. Carry it with intention. Here is a gentle invitation. Choose one affirmation that spoke to you the most today. Whisper it aloud or write it somewhere you'll see in the morning. Let it be the first voice you hear when you wake. And if this message brought you peace, clarity, or comfort, share it with someone who may need it but hasn't found the words. Leave a reflection, a thought, or even a single sentence about what stayed with you. Your voice may help another soul feel less alone. Growth in this life is not about grand gestures. It is about a single choice, made again and again, with quiet sincerity. So as you step forward from here, let this be your intention. Not to consume wisdom, but to live it. Not to wait for peace, but to practice it. Not to chase the light, but to be the one who carries it. When you're ready, we can continue together, one breath, one lesson, one morning at a time. Just say the word, and I'll be here.